It is the most detailed takedown of the Trump presidency so far. A man John Bolton accuses of being stunningly uninformed as to how to run the White House, let alone the US government. A book which claims that his boss even used last year's meeting with President Xi of China to lobby for help to get him re-elected. He, that's Trump, stressed the importance of farmers and increased Chinese purchases of soybeans and wheat in the electoral outcome, John Bolton writes. I would print Trump's exact words, but the government's pre-publication review process has decided otherwise. There's broad confirmation of the grounds for Trump's impeachment in January, the president's attempt to dig dirt on his rival Joe Biden, which begs the question why Bolton refused to give evidence then, apart from the obvious that he now has a surefire bestseller on his hands. This has been billed as an exclusive interview with ABC's Martha Radatz.
I don't think he's fit for office. I don't think he has the competence to carry out the job. There really isn't any guiding principle that I was able to discern other than what's good for Donald Trump's re-election.
The stab-in-the-back anecdotes include Trump wondering if Finland was part of Russia. The president reportedly said invading Venezuela would be cool and that it was really part of the US. He allegedly called reporters scumbags who should be executed or jailed for not revealing their sources. And at this NATO summit, he reportedly threatened to pull America out if its allies did not spend more. Bolton writes that Trump did not like Theresa May and that the feeling seemed mutual. At this meeting at Chequers in 2018, the president reportedly sounded surprised when he was told the UK was a nuclear power. I knew it wasn't intended as a joke, his former national security advisor writes. And Bolton concludes that implementing Brexit was disastrously mishandled. We should have been doing far more to help the Brexiteers, he continues, and I certainly tried. Unfortunately, apart from Trump and myself, almost no one in the administration seemed to care. What a potential tragedy. The tragedy of the Uyghur minority imprisoned in Chinese camps seems to have been given a free pass. According to our interpreter, Trump said that Xi should go ahead with building the camps, which Trump thought was exactly the right thing to do, Bolton writes. As for the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, well, Trump is quoted as deliberately timing this statement about the case to divert attention from another scandal involving his daughter Ivanka's emails. There was that infamous summit with Vladimir Putin at which Trump seemed to clear the Russians of interfering in the US election. Putin had to be laughing uproariously at what he'd gotten away with, Bolton writes. And then that historic first meeting with Kim Jong-un, which might have won Donald Trump the Nobel Peace Prize if it had actually led the North Korean dictator to disarm. Trump told me he was prepared to sign a substance-free communique, have his press conference to declare victory, and then get out of town, is Bolton's account of what he regards as a PR stunt. This is a damning account of the Trump White House and a reminder of just how much is at stake in this November's presidential election. John Bolton reveals that both Boris Johnson and Theresa May used to tease him over his hardline views as a diplomatic gambit. And it's worth remembering that some of the most controversial foreign policy decisions of recent times, such as America's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, have John Bolton's thinking, if not his fingerprints, all over them.
And our Washington correspondent Siobhan Kennedy joins us now from Washington. You're outside the Supreme Court, which I gather has dealt President Trump yet another bit of bad news today. Siobhan.
Well, more on the Supreme Court in a minute, John. Just back to the John Bolton revelations. The reaction of the president today is very telling. Both the White House and the president saying it would be illegal for that book to be published because it contains classified information, which by definition, therefore, must mean that information is true. And yet the president last night on Fox News and today on Twitter, I think you can see the tweet here, dismissing the revelations as fake news, a compilation of lies and made up stories, he says, all intended to make me look bad, just trying to get even for firing him like the sick puppy he is. Now, both of those things obviously can't be true. The bigger question is, what impact will these revelations have right now at this moment? And you could argue really that they won't have much of an impact at all. And that's what's got the Democrats so miffed, because back in January, they begged John Bolton to give testimony in front of the impeachment trial. He had made it known, John, that he was sitting on some very juicy evidence that could have affected the outcome of the trial. And yet he refused to stand and give evidence. He hid behind a White House ban, and he said that if they subpoenaed him, that he would sue. So you can imagine how angry they all are now that he's come forward with these shocking revelations just in time to sell his new book, John.
And what about the Supreme Court today? What have they done?
Well, you will recall in 2012 that President Obama brought in what he called the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals legislation, or DACA, that was intended to protect the immigrant children of undocumented migrants, the children that were brought here by undocumented migrants. President Trump has done all he can since 2017 to dismantle that legislation, but today the Supreme Court blocked his bid to do that. It was the second big decision by the Supreme Court that went against the president this week, and he, doing just what John Bolton says, manages to turn every moment into an electioneering opportunity. He tweeted in not very nice language, John, to his supporter base that the decisions of the Supreme Court were like shotgun blasts, he said, into the face of people who call themselves conservatives and Republicans. And perhaps knowing that he is 9 points behind Joe Biden in the polls, he ended that tweet with "Vote Trump 2020. John.
Well, joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Liz Harrington. She's spokesperson for the Republican National Committee. Will the National Committee enjoy that sort of language about the precious Supreme Court of your country?
It's strong language because we have strong feelings about our fundamental constitutional rights, and absolutely we are concerned about upholding them in the future when it comes to our Second Amendment, which Democrats have really put under attack across this country.
What do you then make of John Bolton's book? Do you want it banned, or frankly, hasn't so much of it been published that we all know the contents anyway?
We're not in the banning book business. That's the radical left, defund the police types that want to ban books. But we do believe in going through the proper vetting process when you're talking about national security, which is what John Bolton professed his entire career was about, right? It was about protecting national security, and yet he's subverting that review process that wasn't complete. So that's why the Justice Department has filed that lawsuit. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because it's full of a bunch of nonsense and lies that have already been refuted by multiple other people that were in these meetings, that were in the room. So it's more falsehoods. And it's unfortunate because it's more lying and it's more leaking from someone who tried to subvert the will of the American people when he really should have been trying to work together with who we elected, our Commander-in-Chief, President Trump.
Nevertheless, let's face it, this is now the latest of I think 3 or more of his aides who've turned against him.
Well, this is the way of the swamp. You know, President Trump gives people the benefit of the doubt. John Bolton begged for this job. He lobbied for it. He praised President Trump and the administration ad nauseum for months to try to get this job. And then, unfortunately, all he does is try to set up his own cabal of people working outside of the will of the American people. Nobody ever elected John Bolton, and we've seen this again and again. It's the swamp. You lie, you leak, you don't understand the will of the American people, you act to subvert it, you think you're smarter and better than everyone else, you fail, but then yet you still find out how to cash in and make money off of it.
Nevertheless, we are learning all sorts of things from this book, not least that he thought Finland was part of Russia. How on earth you could think that was a rather amazing thing. And also that he didn't know that Britain was a nuclear power. Why should this man be the president of so important a country as America?
Why should you believe anything that John Bolton has said? He was the one who lied about intelligence, brought us into Iraq. I mean, this is all of his accounts have already been disputed by people that were there, and including all of the things that he said during the impeachment charade, which he said would not change the outcome of anything. So I don't trust anything that John Bolton has said in this book. It's a bunch of lies, and clearly we know what it's about. When you talk about publicity stunt, it's all about selling books. It's only about his interests and not the interests of the country. And when you look at President Trump's track record, he's actually delivered on a strong national security. He took out Qasem Soleimani.
Elizabeth Harrington.
He withdrew from the Iran deal. He's had a strong American national defense.